The Time Machine wasn't just another sci-fi classic. Behind the stunning time-lapse effects and Rod Taylor's square-jawed heroism, there's a version of this film that almost existed. A darker, bleaker cut with an ending so hopeless that MGM reportedly panicked and buried it. There were scrapped Morlock designs that would have given you nightmares, a prop that literally vanished for decades, and a director so obsessed with H.G. Wells' vision that he spent the rest of his life trying to finish what the studio wouldn't let him start. These are 12 of the weirdest facts about the Time Machine, and hidden in them is the shocking truth that the studio buried a far darker ending, one that stayed faithful to Wells' terrifying vision of humanity's extinction. Number 1. George Pal didn't just want to make this movie, he needed to. Pal had been obsessed with H.G. Wells since he was a kid in Hungary, and by the late 1950s, he'd already proven himself with War of the Worlds in 1953, a massive hit. But when he pitched The Time Machine to MGM, reports say the studio wasn't thrilled. Sci-fi was risky. The budget would need to be razor-thin, somewhere around $800,000 according to production accounts. That's nothing. Even for 1960, Pal had to promise he could pull off Victorian London, nuclear war, and the year 802,701 on a shoestring. So why did they finally say yes? Because Pal wouldn't stop asking. But that tight budget had consequences, and the first casualty was the cast. Number 2. The casting almost went a completely different direction. MGM wanted a bigger name, someone who could open a picture on name alone. Rod Taylor was an Australian actor with a few supporting roles under his belt. Not box office gold, not yet. But George Pal saw something in him. Reports say the studio pushed for a more established leading man. Pal reportedly dug in and insisted. Taylor got the part. Here's the thing. Taylor brought a physical intensity that a pretty boy star never could have. You can see the sweat on his face when he's wrestling Morlocks in those dark, underground tunnels. That wasn't all acting. What were they afraid a bigger star would demand? More money they didn't have. Number 3. The Morlock design went through some disturbing early stages. What you see in the finished film, the blue-skinned, glowing-eyed creatures lurking underground, those were toned down. According to production accounts, earlier concepts were far more grotesque, more animalistic, closer to what Wells actually described in the novel. But the studio got nervous. Too scary for a general audience, too much for 1960. So the design was softened, made more humanoid, almost ape-like. But even the final versions gave kids nightmares for years. Think about it. That dim underground light, the stale air, those glowing eyes watching from the dark. And those were the watered-down version. Now here's where it gets weird. Number 4. The time-lapse sequences were a technical miracle and a logistical nightmare. You know those scenes where George sits in his machine and watches the world blur around him? Flowers blooming, the sun racing across the sky. Those weren't optical tricks. Much of it was shot practically frame by frame over agonizing stretches of time. The crew built miniature sets and lit them with surgical precision. One bump, one flicker, and days of work were ruined. According to effects crew accounts, the process was exhausting. Cold stages, buzzing lights overhead for hours, all for a few seconds of footage. But it paid off. Those sequences won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects in 1961. That gold statue almost never happened, though, because the budget nearly killed everything first. Number 5. The budget was so tight that George Pal had to recycle footage from other movies. Here's what most people don't realize. Those scenes of London being bombed, the volcanic eruptions, the nuclear war montage. Some of that wasn't shot for the Time Machine at all. Pal reportedly pulled stock footage from older MGM productions and stitched it into his film. It was a survival move. He didn't have the money to stage full-scale destruction from scratch, so he borrowed chaos and made it look seamless. That's the trick. When you're desperate, you get creative. And Pal was always desperate on this production. But the real creative hack? That comes next. Number 6. The mannequin in the shop window might be the cleverest low-budget effect. Remember that scene where George watches fashions change on a department store dummy as decades fly by? That was done with simple costume changes and careful stop-start camera work. Stop the camera, swap the dress, roll again, over and over. It sounds crude, but the effect is hypnotic. You feel time moving. You feel decades slipping past your face like a cold wind, all from a mannequin and some fabric. Some crew members later called it one of the most cost-effective shots in the whole film. Just patience and imagination, but while the small details were working beautifully, the big picture was falling apart behind the scenes. Number 7. The miniature London sets took weeks to build and seconds to destroy. The production team constructed detailed miniature streets for the war sequences, little lampposts, cobblestone roads built by hand. Then they blew them apart. According to production accounts, these destruction shots were essentially one-take events. You build it, you burn it, you pray the camera catches it right. If something went wrong, bad angle, bad timing, you couldn't just rebuild overnight. Not on this budget. One crew member reportedly described the atmosphere on those shoot days as pure silence right before the explosion, then either cheering or cursing. That's filmmaking on the edge. And, speaking of edges, the next fact is about a line MGM absolutely refused to cross. Number 8. There was a far darker journey into the future that never made it to screen. In Wells's novel, the time traveler doesn't stop at the year 802,701. He keeps going. Millions of years forward, he sees the sun swollen and red, the earth dying, the last traces of life crawling across a frozen beach under a darkening sky. It's one of the most haunting passages in science fiction, and George Pal wanted to film it. Reports say he pushed hard to include this dying Earth sequence, but MGM said no. Too bleak, too expensive, too uncommercial, scrapped. That entire vision, locked away in concept art and storyboards. What would it have looked like on screen? We'll never know. But that wasn't the only thing the studio cut. Number 9. The ending you saw was not the ending George Pal wanted. In the finished film, George goes back to the future to help the Eloi rebuild. He takes 3 books with him. It's hopeful, warm, the kind of ending that sends you home smiling. But according to multiple accounts, Pal's original vision was darker, closer to Wells, a version where humanity's decline wasn't something you could fix with courage and good intentions. The studio reportedly insisted on the optimistic version. Audiences in 1960 wanted hope, not existential dread, so the bleaker ending was buried. Here's the scary part. Some crew members claimed elements of it were actually filmed. If those scenes ever existed on celluloid, they've never surfaced, vanished. And that's not the only thing that disappeared. Number 10. The actual time machine prop vanished after production wrapped. This is one of the strangest stories in Hollywood prop history. That beautiful Victorian contraption, brass, velvet, spinning disc on the back, it just disappeared from MGM's storage. For years, nobody knew where it was. Some figured it had been scrapped. Others thought it was rotting in some forgotten warehouse, collecting dust behind a metal door in the dark. Then, decades later, it resurfaced. The prop was found, restored, and eventually sold at auction for a significant sum, a testament to how iconic the design had become. A machine that traveled through time on screen nearly got lost to time itself. Almost too perfect. But the strangest obsession connected to this film comes next. Number 11. George Pal spent the rest of his life trying to make a sequel. After The Time Machine became a hit and won its Oscar, Pal wanted to go further. He wanted to film the rest of Wells' story, the dying Earth, the far future, all the parts the studio had forced him to cut. For nearly 20 years, he developed concepts for a follow-up. Different scripts, different approaches. None got greenlit. Studios kept saying no, too expensive, too weird, too dark. Pal reportedly carried the project with him like a weight, right up until his death in 1980. He never got to make it. 20 years of what-ifs, locked in a drawer. That's not just a production story, that's a haunting. And the final fact might explain why this movie still won't let go. Number 12. The reason The Time Machine endures isn't the effects or the adventure, it's the dread underneath. Watch it again. Really watch it. Beneath the Technicolor spectacle, there's a film about a man who discovers that humanity destroys itself over and over, war after war after war, and the survivors don't become heroes. They become cattle, beautiful, empty-eyed cattle, farmed by monsters in the dark. The Morlocks aren't just villains, they're a mirror. Wells wrote that warning in 1895. Pal filmed it in 1960. and the studio tried to soften it with a hopeful ending and prettier monsters. But the darkness is still there, humming underneath every single frame, like a sound you can't quite place. You feel it, like a cold draft sliding under a locked door.